All right, we are live. We got a few folks. We'll give them a chance to kind of wander in. But hey, y'all, Jim Pankey here, and right up there is Nick Hornbuckle. So
everybody, happy Sunday.
So,
Happy Sunday.
Yeah, so we're getting a few folks in. I'm going to make this big banner go away just in a second.
Okay.
We'll letting folks know they're in the right place. You know.
Excellent. This is the accordion workshop, is that right?
It is the accordion and kazoo workshop.
I probably shouldn't say that to you because you can probably play both of those things very well.
I don't play the accordion. I know, you know, it's much maligned as the banjo is, but I will render a tune on the kazoo just to be annoying, you know. So.
Yeah. Well, there's always room for being annoying. That's for sure.
Yeah. So here we are. All right. So we got some folks here. Hey, y'all. All right. So just to give you all an idea how this will kind of work. I mean, like if somebody has a comment, then I can post it right up here on the screen. So like SW says howdy ho. So howdy ho to SW.
Howdy ho. Someone who's very much into privacy. SW, who is that?
Yeah, I don't know. Someone. No, doesn't start with a W. Well, Nick, I'm proud that you wore your Canadian uniform there of plaid.
Yes. Well, it's a little bit chilly here this morning, and I just really hate turning the heat on. So. Yeah,
it's a little cool here. I don't know what the temperature is, but it's been fairly cool, and so we'll talk about the weather. It's 50. It's like in the 50s here, so it's not super cold, but it's definitely cooler than it was yesterday. So.
Well, 50 degrees on Vancouver Island is actually colder than 50 degrees in Georgia.
Oh, sure. Yeah, y'all got wind and humidity, and
well, we got icebergs and polar bears, and all that.
So, really. Are you in Vancouver proper, or are you out in the country?
I actually live on Vancouver Island, which is a pretty good sized island off the coast of British Columbia. Okay. It's where the provincial seat of government is, Victoria.
Right.
And I live in a little town called Nanaimo, which is about halfway up the east or the landward side of the island. And if there's any folks out there that have never been to Vancouver Island, I'm of two distinct minds, because one is to say you absolutely need to come because it's spectacularly beautiful. But I'm also likely to say, yeah, you don't have to.
Since we're talking about the weather, I thought this was an interesting mix. Says that it's raining in Ireland. No surprise.
Yeah, it's like Ireland and the west coast of the U.S. are kind of the same, aren't they? It's always raining.
Yeah, especially Pacific Northwest for sure. Y'all get a lot of rain. So basically, folks, if you don't know Nick. Nick plays with the Jaybirds, John Reischman, and he's let me just go ahead and pitch this. He's recently released a new CD. It's called 13 or so, and there are probably 13 or so tunes on this recording or so, which kind of goes along with the theme of your previous recording, which was. What, 12 times 2?
It was this
plus or minus, yeah.
12 by 2, yeah. And it's interesting because I didn't purposefully set out to do math equations for titles in both.
Well, it's a nice thing. I think you've started something you can't quit now. It's like, what am I going to do next? It's got to be math.
Yeah, exactly. It'll be like just a random word. QWERTY for the brown fox or something.
Yeah, you since you and I are so good at math, I'm going 13 or so, and I'm counting. I'm going, I see 12.
There's actually, I don't know. I mean, I find this stuff to be really interesting. It's interesting to me, but one of the cuts let's see, which one is it? Number 10, A Farewell to the Cowgirl with the Pigtails, which I dedicated to my mom. It's actually 2 tunes in one.
Okay.
So that's where the 13 comes in. Because it's 13 or so, more or less. And actually, on the cover, if you count, there are 13 blades of grass. And I didn't plan that at all. It just happened that way. So I had named the tune 13 or so, and I was trying to figure out what I was going to call the record. And I wanted to call it that because I really liked that tune. And I started finding all these reiterating versions of 13 or so. I was thinking, well, it's meant to be.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Yeah. I alluded to this in a previous live stream, hinted that I had a special guest coming and that what was going to be you. And this is the only CD that I have in my car currently.
Is that car at the bottom of a lake somewhere?
No, it's the one I drive, but it's the only one in the car. And interestingly enough, the other CD I have is yours, and it's in my truck.
Oh, really?
So, yeah. Wow. I'm your biggest fan. I'm the one that bought these albums.
Yeah, I knew that I sold one of each, and they're to you. That's fantastic. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. You've gone double linoleum at this point. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean that's what's the old joke? How do you become a millionaire playing bluegrass? You start with 2.
Start with $2 million.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So. Let's see. We got folks from all over. We got folks from Florida and the UK and Connecticut, and Ohio, and
wow, that's great.
Chattanooga.
Oh, great.
I got neighbors here. So
this is they're just checking up on you. This is actually the first time that I've done something like this, and I just want to thank you again for giving me this opportunity because I have seen several of yours, and I've seen other people who've gone online and done this, and it just has kind of seemed a little bit.
It's intimidating, isn't it?
It's like and too, there's so many great musicians and players that are doing this. I kind of don't want to muddy the waters, but I'm happy to do it. I'm very
well. Yeah, I watched John McEwen last night. He's doing a regular live stream on Facebook, and it's called The Life I Picked, is what he's named it, and it's pretty interesting just to hear him talk about. Because John's been around just literally forever and played with everybody, so he's got great stories. So,
is that you and their Uncle Dave? Is that what he says?
Yeah. Oh man.
Are you in their Uncle Dave or something like that?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
That's absolutely one of my favorite banjo tracks of all time. Is those 2 guys playing that tune? I think it's really cool.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
So Earl plays, his playing is just so, it's just so right.
Oh, I know. Yeah. And in that time period when they recorded that, Earl's playing was just so good. I'm not saying that, the stuff they recorded in the 50s, wasn't good, but by the late 60s, early 70s, Earl's playing had evolved. It really had.
Absolutely.
A lot of people kind of, turn their nose up at it. But man, for me, that was the stuff I was really into. I love the Scruggs review. Man, I have all of the Scruggs review stuff, and I just loved it. And I loved how that worked. So, bluegrass born, bluegrass bred. But man, I love the review, and it just was.
So, I'm sorry to interrupt. There's this movie that I'm sure everybody's seen it if you haven't. It's made by this guy named David Hoffman. It's called Earl Scruggs Family and Friends, I think.
Oh, yeah.
And there's one scene in that where they're listening to probably like an acetate of a mix or something at Earl and Louise's house. And it's Earl and Randy and Gary, and they're listening to this. And it's a cut of a Beatles tune. With a little help from my friends, and his banjo playing on that cut is, there are so few people that can do what he did, which is actually play the melody. The real melody, and you hear it and you go, oh, it's that tune. There
Yeah.
are so few people that can do that. And just watching that movie and seeing them listen to that and hearing his banjo is just like, oh my God.
You know,
It's really amazing. And I kind of feel like, I mean, you know, I'm no expert, but I kind of feel like a lot of people just completely blow right by that and don't appreciate it for how difficult it is to do that. I mean, there's one other guy that I can think of off the top of my head who really does that, and that's Craig Smith.
yeah, Craig. You know, there's a later recording. I forget what album it was on. It was an Earl album, and he does Ring of Fire.
Ah, yeah.
And what's so cool about it, if you go to the Johnny Cash version of Ring of Fire and you listen to it and you listen to the words, and then you listen to Earl play that song, Earl plays the words.
Yeah.
So like the first verse is different from the second verse, but when Earl plays the second break, it's the second verse that Johnny Cash sings. It's mind blowing. I mean, it really is that he's like, because, you know, I can play Ring of Fire. I mean, it's a simple melody, but to play it and play the words that were sang and in the inflection that they were saying and then the rhythm that, it's just unreal. So
And he's I really hate to use the word best, but he's definitely one of my best.
Oh, I know. And, you know, like most of us that learned to play bluegrass banjo, you know, we all started with Earl at some, you know,
That's
and I, you know, Dad had Flat and Scruggs albums and stuff. And so Dad didn't play the banjo, but I mean, he had heard a lot of it. And so one of the best stories I tell all the time, when I was learning to play, I was sitting in my bedroom. I don't know what I was working on. It might have been Dear Old Dixie, or it might have been Daybreak and Dixie. It was one of those Dixie tunes. And I was sitting there. I'm pretty sure it was Dear Old Dixie. And I'm sitting there working on it. And man, I am just smoking it. I'm killing it. Every note that I could possibly play, I was playing. And my dad walks by the room and he pokes his head in my door and says, "What are you playing?" I said, "Dear Old Dixie." And he says, "Doesn't sound like it." And he walks off. And I yelled down the hall. I said, "What do you don't play banjo?" He says, "I might not play banjo, but I know what Dear Old Dixie sounds like."
I know what the tune is.
And so from that point on, you know, I tried my darndest to play the song. And, you know, don't go crazy. Don't play. I mean, I can play some silly stuff, but you know, the melody is the melody and it needs to be there.
You know, I had a similar moment with my grandmother. She really loved the tune Red Wing. And I'd been playing for a couple years probably, and we were going to go spend a week with her over in Eastern Washington, little town called the Soton, if anybody knows that place. So I worked up this version of Red Wing that was just had all the bells and whistles in it. And I sat down, I said, "Honey," that's what we called her. I said, "Honey, I have a song I want to play for you." She said, "Great." And so I played it. She said, "Wow, that was really pretty. What was it?"
Yeah.
And I was like, "Oh,
yeah.
this is
such a sinking feeling." Yeah, you know, when you can just. Oh, I know. And,
you know, and that's a tune that she knew. She knew inside and out. She'd sung it since she was a little girl. And for me to play it in such a way that she didn't even recognize any of it was like, oh, back to the drawing board.
Time to re-look at that. Yeah. And how old were you then?
Well, I started playing like in 1973 or 74. I don't really remember, but I was about, 11 or 12.
Right.
So this would have been when I was maybe 13 or 14.
Right.
And when I started learning how to play, my family is musical to a certain extent, but that musicality is expressed in, like my mom and my aunt and my grandmother, my great grandmother, all play the piano. And so, we took piano lessons. We were strongly encouraged to take piano lessons as kids. And so that was music. There was, specs on the page that you read. And nobody played banjos or guitars. Nobody knew anything about bluegrass. My dad was a big country western fan, but at that time, the only real song that at least that I remember that had any banjo in it at all was that Statler Brothers tune, Flowers on the Wall.
Right. Yeah.
It was way in the back. And, you know, I could remember hearing Dueling Banjos and Foggy Mountain Breakdown on the radio. Because
right.
I think that Bonnie and Clyde had come out in 68 or 69.
68 or 9, yeah, that's right.
Deliverance was probably 70 something. And so it was, those were pop hits.
Yeah.
So that sound of the banjo, and of course there's the Ballad of Jed Clampett, but, you know, in my family, I think, you know, my parents were really great, very supportive. And I'm sure that they were kind of like, where's this coming from?
Right. Yeah. See, my dad was a huge country music fan. And I remember when Hee Haw came on, that was 1969. And I remember Dad taking the cassette recorder that he had and recording stuff from television. So he would record stuff off of Hee Haw. So I remember hearing banjo quite a bit. And even when I was a little kid, there's old 8mm home movies of me imitating Grandpa Jones when I was just a toddler, you know.
That's
so
great.
I kind of grew up around it, but I didn't start playing until I was 13 or 14, I guess, you know. And it's just some ways a late bloomer. Still not sure if I've bloomed yet. I'm still so when you started playing, did you start out as a 3-finger player?
I did. I played 3-finger for okay, so let's just, for the sake of argument, assume that I started in 1973. So I played all through high school. I graduated in 1980. And then when I went to college in Bellingham, Washington, I couldn't find any bluegrass musicians up there. I grew up in the South Puget Sound area of Washington State, down near Olympia. So when I went to school in Bellingham, I couldn't find any bluegrass musicians, which is incredibly lame, because at that time there was Peter Schwimmer lived in Bellingham, and he's an amazing banjo player, you know, and other Cliff Perry and a bunch of other bluegrass musicians were in Bellingham. I just didn't get off campus and meet them. So anyway, when that happened, I had been playing electric bass in a rock and roll band, so I kind of put my banjo down and focused on the bass, and I played that for the next 10 years or so. I didn't play my banjo at all. And then when I picked it up again, I found that the stuff that I did as a kid with 3 fingers was a little more difficult.
Right.
You know, like I would have this little bit of pain in my wrist, not a big deal. But then, so I continued on as a 3-finger player. And then like in about 99 or 2000, I started to notice that my middle finger on my right hand didn't quite feel right. Like it wasn't numb. It wasn't curling up. There was no real overt, gross, you know, physical malady. It just didn't feel right. Like if these 2 fingers were 100%, this one was like 98. And if you're trying to do something that's smooth and 100, 198, with that. So anyway, so time went along and we moved to Vancouver Island, and I decided to try to become a full-time musician, and it just kept getting worse. Like it was really noticeable to me. And we'd be out on the road, and I would grab people. Like I can distinctly remember sitting down with both Dennis Caplinger and Bill Evans and just playing for them and saying, okay, do you hear it? And they're like, no, what are you talking about? It sounds fine to me. But to me, I could hear it. It sounded
right. Yeah.
And it felt off. So anyway, so about 2007 or so, I was trying all kinds of, you know, different solutions to get around the problem, because, you know, I had committed to being in this band. I loved the band, the Jaybirds. We were on the road a lot. I was paying my mortgage with playing music, and it's like, this has got to work, you know. And so I would try different things. I tried putting a pick on my ring finger, and I tried taping my fingertips to the head of the banjo, just all kinds of really weird stuff, trying to figure out a workaround. And I remember one day I was standing in my living room playing along with Foggy Mountain Banjo, and Fireball Mail comes on, and I just start playing that Earl's break, kickoff break, in that same roll-based style with 2 fingers instead of 3. And it was just instantly there. It was instantly much easier to play that than it was the three fingers. And it was,
which is kind of the opposite of what Earl talks about when he was working with Reuben, you know, because he started with two fingers and then added the third, and it was just better for him. So
yeah, well, you know, I mean, we had talked about this a little bit yesterday, and I kind of been thinking about this, and I can kind of say sometimes some things that may not accurately represent how I feel. And my statement yesterday was that I felt like Earl's mechanical, how he approached the banjo in a mechanical sense is almost unimportant. That where he gets his sound is from his brain and his ears and his heart. But in fact, in order to get that rolling three-finger sound, you kind of have to play with three fingers. So I'll have
sure. Yeah.
I'll have to walk back a little bit. But so long story short, so it took me a good 6 months to kind of wrap my head around it, because my whole, you know, how I thought of myself as a player was I'm a three-finger player and I'm playing with two fingers. And I would wear a pick on the middle finger and just rest it on the head. I remember we were playing at the Romp, like I was telling you yesterday, and we were out in the field warming up, and our bass player, Tricia, kind of looks down and she sees me just resting this middle finger on the head with a pick on it. She's just kind of, you know, in a curious, genuine way says, "How come you're wearing a pick on that finger?" You know, because obviously he didn't say it, but obviously I wasn't using it. I was like, "Well, I don't know." I'm kind of hoping that I'll get struck by lightning and it'll come back, but never did.
But, you know, so I guess it would have been later that you discovered Jackie Phelps.
Yeah, you know, when I went to the two-finger way of playing, I came at it from two sort of distinctly different approaches. And one is that I was so conversant in the Earl Scruggs way of playing. You know, I don't claim to be a great Scruggs player because there's only one great Scruggs player, and that's Earl Scruggs. But, you know, once you are familiar with his vocabulary and how he approaches things and all that, it kind of becomes how you speak, you know.
Right.
And then the other angle that I came at from was I'm a big fan of clawhammer banjo players. I can't do it to save my life, but I just love that approach. And one of the things that I learned is a lot of times clawhammer players will get a lot of notes out of their left hand.
Yeah.
And three-finger players typically want to pick every note.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just a really different approach. And so I'll play a tune here in a minute, but I started experimenting with. So about that same time, I started experimenting with these open tunings that clawhammer players use. Mm-hmm. And I found that with the open tuning, some of these fiddle tunes are not necessarily easy to play, but they're easier for me to play because there's a lot of open notes instead of having to fret or, you know,
right,
a bunch of strings. And I found that I could use hammer-ons and pull-offs in such a way to articulate all these eighth note patterns that I didn't have to pick every note. You know, it required, and it still requires, a certain amount of discipline with my right hand. So I'm not just hammering with my right hand, because a picked note played at full velocity is not going to be the same amplitude as a pull-off or a hammer-on. So you have to kind of lighten up to make it work. I mean, you know what I'm talking about. Yeah,
I mean, yeah, because I, you know, on the old time stuff, that's my world. You know, it's you know, I'm actually playing notes with the left hand that I didn't even hit with the right hand.
Right.
You know, like an alternate string pull off and different things like that. And obviously they're not as loud as the right hand. So if you're going to utilize that, I mean, there's definitely that balance, the volume balance, and all of that you've got to.
Well, you know, one of the things that I like about this approach too, and it's, you know, I mean, to a certain extent, it's completely idiosyncratic, because I don't know of any other players that do this, but that's mostly because I don't know a whole lot about the players. But anyway, so one of the things that I like about this approach is that there's a natural sort of variation in the volume of the individual notes just because of the way that they're being articulated. And I really like that sound. You know, I mean, it has to be under control. You can't just be just a random throwing it at the wall and hoping something works. But that's one of the things, getting back to Earl Scruggs, that's one of the things I really like about his later, you know, like late, you know, early 60s on, the way that he approached the banjos. It's just, there's so much more subtlety and nuance in it. It's not just, and nothing against it, but it's not just a string of eighth notes the same volume, right? Which is,
Right.
That's hard to do. People that can do that have my absolute admiration. But to me, I kind of appreciate a little more, and I don't mean to be pejorative, but a little bit more musical approach. Not to suggest the other isn't musical, but it just seems to me to be more interesting.
You know, well, yeah, you know, Earl played good notes. He played great. His dynamics were incredible. You know, it's just like, and you can listen to Earl play, and like when you start studying, let's say, Foggy Mountain Banjo album, you know, you're going to work out his Lonesome Road Blues break, and you can get all the notes. You can get every one of them. They're all out there to get. But what you miss, especially in the quest for all the right notes, is the notes that he hit harder than the other notes. And they're not, and you never know where they're going to be. You know, he's playing along, and then boom, there's this note just out of the blue that just jumps out, and you go, wonder why he did that. But but I mean, it's what makes, that's one of the things that makes Earl sound like Earl, and makes, you know, and it's like, and not, you know, so yeah, that whole dynamics thing, and then of course with the band, you know, that whole ebb and flow of tempo.
Oh man, this guy's the best. Lester's guitar playing is that, you know, I'm sure that you know Chris Sharp, and he has got a really good handle on that. Who actually, Chris Sharp is a really good Scruggs style banjo player, by the way. Chris has got that Lester flat style guitar really figured out, and it's such a different approach than the Jimmy Martin style, for instance, which Jimmy Martin's a great rhythm guitar player, you know. But Janet says, would I recommend starting with 2 or 3 if a person was beginning? Hey, Janet, thanks very much. Well, it depends on what you want to do, and I can go into more detail on that. If what you want to do is you want to be playing banjo in a bluegrass band, I would strongly advocate for 3-finger, because everything is based around that, you know. Jim and I had a little get together yesterday afternoon, and I was talking about this, and with the 2-finger, I don't really play proper 2-finger. There are people that really play really great 2-finger banjo playing, like a fellow named Chip Arnold is a great guy named
Chip's killer.
His Chip's banjo playing is just sublime. I mean, he's got a couple of videos. I imagine they're on YouTube, and it's just beautiful. It's really beautiful. But it may not be something that would really necessarily fit in a traditional bluegrass band.
And somebody had posted the question if I was going to do any 2-finger instruction videos, and probably not, because you know, what little bit of 2-finger that I've experimented with is probably about the same direction that Nick is. I'm approaching it as a bluegrass picker. You know, I would have to go back to square one and you know, fill my head with guys like Chip and Will Keys and some of these original 2-finger players just to figure out how all of that's working. But I mean, I like to do it, but gosh, you know, it's I doubt that it's going to be me doing any kind of instruction videos for any kind of thumb lead. But that brings up a question too. You know, he asked if I was going to do any thumb lead. Man, I don't even play thumb lead in 3-finger. I mean, I do some thumb lead, but I switch back and forth between, because I grew up listening to Earl and Ralph. So, you know, so I'm a blend of both. So, which brings a question, Nick, I guess, and maybe I probably already know the answer, but do you approach it from a thumb lead perspective, or are you just hunting the note?
Well, okay, so I'm really, I'll just say this as a quick little tangent before I get into the tangent, and that is that I can go absolutely tangential on you. Okay. So with the thumb lead, as far as my understanding of Earl Scruggs style, it's one of these solutions to a problem that is just absolutely elegant in its simplicity. And as far as I understand, and if I'm wrong, please correct me, but my understanding of his approach is basically you play the melody with your thumb and you fill in with your other fingers.
Makes
and
perfect sense.
And it's like, that is, whenever you have a problem to solve and your solution is that simple, that's a really good solution, as opposed to the solution of, well, when it's Tuesday, do it this way, but if it's raining on Tuesday, do it that way. But however, if it's after 6 o'clock, do this. You know, it's just like, that's a, so when I started to play, I listened to Earl almost exclusively, Earl and, you know, people like J.D. Crowe, who are, you know, it's another tangent here. People say that J.D. Crowe is one of the best Scruggs style players, and I would have to respectfully disagree with that. And I would say that J.D. Crowe is the best J.D. Crowe style banjo.
Absolutely, yeah.
When you listen to those two guys play the same song, I mean, maybe it's just because I've been just microscoping this stuff for years, but to me, I mean, they couldn't be more different, really. I mean, they're in the same vein. I can totally see where someone could say, oh, well, J.D. Crowe plays just like Earl Scruggs, but he really doesn't. He plays his style, and I really, really like that about him. I mean, his style is like Earl's in the sense that it's instantly compelling. It instantly draws your ear, and yet it's really different than the way Earl approaches it. But hey, Jim, what I wanted to do is, because people are asking about, can I just play a tune real quick?
Please do. Please do. Tilt your camera down. We can watch your hands.
Sure. So this is the tune that in about 95 or so, there was a tour that went around both on the East Coast and the West Coast, and I think it was called Masters of the Banjo, or Masters of the Banjo. And when it came to Seattle, there was just so many great players. I think that Tony Ellis was on that, and there was a fella from West Africa, and one of the other players on there was this really great fiddler and banjo player by the name of Kirk Sutphin. I really love his playing. So anyway, so how that relates to what I'm going to do is that the next day I went out and bought as many Tony Ellis CDs as I could find and as many Kirk Sutphin CDs as I could find, because he was great. Just, you know, really, it was clawhammer playing, and I think Kirk probably played the fiddle too, but it was just, you know, really grabbed me. And so this album, it's called New Roots and Old Branches, I think, or
I think that's right.
Yeah, something like that. It's just I think that there's probably a couple of vocal numbers on there, but it's mostly instrumental. And when I started monkeying around with this is before I went to two finger, but I started monkeying around with open tunings, and the first one I discovered was this double C, which I'm capable of up to 2. So in open, it would be from the first string D, C, G, C, G, but capable up 2, it's E, D, A, D, A. So it's kind of it's open. It's like a D ninth chord, which is just, you could just play that and it sounds cool. But so anyway, so this tune that I found that I really liked was a tune called The Virginia Reel. And because, you know, I'm not really from down there, I didn't realize that there's more than one Virginia Reel.
Right.
4 of them. And so this is just the one that they happened to call that. And I started, I was really wanting to duplicate what the fiddle was playing note for note. And when I was kind of a couple years into playing the banjo, I sort of tried to explore what they call the melodic style of playing, which is the way that Bill Keith plays, and, you know, people like Bela Fleck and, you know, Scott Bestel and Allison Brown. It's a very incredibly sophisticated and musical way of playing, but I just could not wrap my little teeny brain around it. I had to constantly practice Sailor's hornpipe just to keep it in my fingers. I just couldn't get it. There are people that can really do it. Like Bob Black is amazing, but I just can't. It's not for me.
Right.
But so anyway, so what I was trying to do is to find a way to play the melody that the fiddle was playing, but not have to play it in that melodic style. And so I started to find that with this open-ish tuning, the key of D, it freed up my left hand to do things like hammer-ons and pull-offs that my left-hand fingers might otherwise be occupied with, holding down parts of the chord.
Right.
And then I also found that I was able to, after a lot of practice, I was able to articulate the melody notes close to the same intensity or amplitude or volume or whatever attack with hammer-ons and pull-offs as I was able to do that with my by picking it. So I'll just play a little bit of it here. What I've got here is on the record that I released, the most recent one. I have several great players on them, and one of them is a really amazingly talented young fiddle player from Canada named Trent Freeman. And in one of the tracks that he sent me, he's just doing a chop shuffle. And I really advocate practicing along with some kind of a rhythm device, but a metronome to me just kind of drives me insane. So what I did is that I took that chop shuffle and put it on a grid on my DAW and made it into a loop that's about 7 seconds long. And I put it on this app that I have on my phone. It's called the Amazing Slowdowner. And so it's really a very powerful app, and I use it all the time for transcribing fiddle tunes, but you can slow and down and speed up and change the pitch of stuff. And so anyway, so what you are about to hear is this fiddle chop as a rhythm thing that I'm gonna hopefully try to play along with. Okay, let's see.
Don't forget to tilt down so we can watch your hands.
So is that coming across?
Yeah, that's good.
Is it too loud?
It's a little loud, but I think I can get a little less loud.
How's that?
There you go.
So there's that.
That's stout. I like that.
And you can sort of see, I mean, maybe I should play it with would it help to play it with my left hand too? Or is that, I don't know.
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, yeah, since you've got so many pull-offs and other things that are happening there, but, they're going to be hard to see,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so I'll just play this one phrase that is kind of interesting. So I'll just play it. So out of all those eighth notes, I'm probably hitting at the most half of them with my right.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm sure that as you listen to it, that's a fairly relaxed tempo. I'm sure that as you listen to it, you can probably pick out which notes are being picked and which aren't. But when it gets up to tempo, like the way that's on the record, it gets harder to tell because the notes are kind of going by quicker, if that makes sense.
Well, yeah. And then once it's mastered, yeah. It really levels everything out.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, I mean, again, one of the things that I really like about that approach is that it kind of gives this kind of ebb and flow to the music instead of it all being the same volume, which, you know, that really comes down to like, what is it that you want to achieve? If you want to have a sound where it's very regular and all the notes have the same attack and tone and volume, this may not be the approach to use.
Oh, yeah. Well, sure. Let's see here. What about, I don't want to skip anybody else's questions here. I've got plenty myself, y'all. So play me something bluegrass.
Okay. Get in tune or attempt to get in tune.
While he's tuning, Mickey, I'll answer your question. As a beginner, do you need to be proficient at Scruggs before you start learning claw hammer? I kind of learned them both at the same time because they were just so different. So, you know, you could, you know, and hey, if you like the sound of the claw hammer, dive right on in. I've got a series out there, kind of a claw hammer for the bluegrass picker. So go check that out. And then Terry, is an advantage in the long run to pick hard when you begin. You need to pick hard enough. Is that right, Nick?
Well, sorry, I don't mean to derail your thought. You go ahead and finish.
Well, one of the things that I have a lot of students, more students that tend not to pick hard enough. They're not driving the instrument. So I had a student come to me one time. I was teaching at Kaufman Camp, and he had signed up for Steve has these master sessions, and they sign up. You know, you get a 5-minute lesson, and he comes to me and he says, "I just don't think my banjo is loud enough." I said, "Let me see it." And I played it for him, and he said, "What? It's not that loud when I play it." And I'm thinking, well, what are you doing? Yeah. So yeah, you know, I mean, you need to pick hard enough. You know, I mean, Nick, I mean, how hard is hard enough? I guess. Well,
you know, that is a really good question, and I look back on the way that I learned, and I really wish that I could go back and say to my 12-year-old self, well, a lot of things actually, but
yeah.
Banjo playing, it is, I was fortunate enough when I was in high school to be in a band, and it was kind of a bluegrass band, kind of a folk band, but it gave me the opportunity to play with other musicians and get out and play. We played in, you know, rest homes and county fairs and just all over the place. It was great. But with that said, I learned how to play with a bunch of people that were kind of bangers, not necessarily real paying attention to dynamics. And so I learned how to play in a way that was my hand and my arm were just always tense. When I was 13, I wasn't really aware of it, because you're 13. I mean, you're bulletproof. You can do anything.
Right.
I really think that, I mean, you know, going back and trying to figure out what caused the problem with my middle finger, I kind of think that one of the factors involved was learning how to play and internalizing this feeling of playing when I'm tense.
Right.
So, but when you play hard, you don't have to be tense. I mean, we're getting into really little distinctions of language, and I don't want to lead anybody astray. I will absolutely agree with Jim and say that you need to play with the sense of authority.
Right.
And that doesn't mean absolutely hitting it so hard that you're pulling the strings out of the bridge. You don't want to do that. But you don't want to, you know, mollycoddle it either. You want to make sure that it speaks.
You want the band. You want to feel the banjo move when you play it. You know.
Yeah.
I think, you know, it's
I have heard people. One of the things that I've worked on over the last many years is being more comfortable with a much lighter touch. You know, still being able to really hit it if I have to, because you know, I think that there's a certain advantage to doing that in the sense that I think that to a certain extent you might get a better tone, maybe. You can certainly play faster. It's not as fatiguing on your hands to play if you play a little bit lighter. And again, that's coming at it from the perspective of someone who played really hard. So
yeah.
I'm backing off a bit.
Yeah.
As a quick little another tangent, we should put a counter somewhere for all the tangents. Another quick little tangent, several years ago, the Jaybirds were playing at this festival in Blythe, California, and like the headlining band there was J.D. Crowe, and well, he wasn't by himself; he had his band, of course. And I was standing backstage of one of the stages, and there was a big crowd of about 10 people standing around JD while he was playing. And, you know, I had seen him on stage once, and I had certainly heard his recordings. I mean, endlessly listened to it, but I'd never actually heard him play in person. So I kind of snuck over and was kind of hiding in the back and just kind of watching. And he played and again, it was just standing outside and a bunch of people. He played much lighter than I would have imagined.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was really, really, really interesting to me. It's like, wow. And, you know, that's not to say that when he's on stage playing or in a studio or in a different environment, he might lay into it a little bit harder. But it was really kind of eye-opening to me. It's like, man, this guy is such a great player, and he sounds just like he's got the best tone, and he's not beating it to death.
Right.
And
Yeah.
just as another tangent, and then I will play you Bluegrass, is that there is a section on Foggy Mountain Banjo when Earl is playing Reuben, and he's doing those up the neck chokes, those back notes.
Yeah.
And to my ear, there is, after one of them, it seems to me like you can hear the sound of his hand hitting the head.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And it's like that. I mean, and granted, it's in the studio, it's been compressed, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But when I realized that's what it was, and I realized that the surrounding notes weren't all that much louder than the sound of his hand hitting, I was like, what? This is like magic. I had no.
Yeah.
Because of the way that he plays with such authority and such clarity of tone, it just always sounded to me like he was just beating the living tar out of it. And maybe when he was doing back in the 40s, you know, maybe I don't really know.
Yeah. Hard to, it's hard to know. I mean,
yeah.
And
but these little subtle clues, and that's one of them. And you know what? I could have totally misheard that, but I kind of don't think that I did, because I've listened to that, you know, thousands of times with headphones. Like, what is that sound? And I think it's the sound of his hand hitting the head of the banjo.
Yeah.
So let me play I had when I was a kid, I bought a Flat and Scruggs record that the cover is them standing in front of a. No, wait, it's got who's in the band? It's got Hilo. What's his last name? What's the
Hilo Brown?
Hilo Brown is in the picture, and I think that Lester and Earl they're both wearing jackets, of course, but I can't remember what color the jackets are, red or something. And it's an album that's like, I think that it's a repackaged thing, but it's. You know, it's got Pike County Breakdown on it, and Foggy Mountain Breakdown, and Take Me in Your Lifeboat, and Little Girl.
So it's like a compilation.
Yeah. And so one of the songs that I really liked, although when I was a kid, it just absolutely terrified me, because I couldn't imagine being without my mom and dad. And the tune is called No Mother or Dad. I mean, you listen to they're singing, it's like, it's heartbreaking, especially when you're 14 years old going, what?
Yeah,
right. What do you mean? This isn't the way it's always going to be, you know? So anyway, so I will I will play that. Let me see. Should I play with the click or not? I don't know. Let's see what
It
this
don't matter.
I'll bail on that. Okay, so this is how I would play. Whatever. Kind of. Sorry, Earl.
Well, yeah. Well, you know, I don't play like Earl either, but you know, but just for folks to have a perspective. Okay, you just heard Nick play that. All right, now with 3 fingers.
Cool. Yeah.
So
Yeah, buddy.
Not a lot of difference, but Nick's was in 10.
It's very generous of you to say that. One of the things that we were talking about earlier, and you know, I'm since I'm not sure who all is watching and what people's interests are, I'll just kind of talk about. Unless people have specific questions, I'll just kind of talk about some of the things that I think are interesting. And we had been earlier talking about Earl Scruggs and his ability to pull certain notes out of a roll to accentuate certain melody notes and their certain rhythmic groove things that I think is just so cool. And to my ear, and I'm going to slightly exaggerate this, but to my ear, when I hear Earl play Fireball Male, I don't hear a real steady, even stream of eighth notes. The timing is pretty dang close to being steady, but the amplitude, the volume of the individual notes is different. And just let me play just this first little bit, and we can have a discussion about this, or not other things. But I find this stuff to be really interesting. So I kind of maybe laid it on a bit thick there, but do you hear what I'm saying? Do you hear that same thing in his playing?
Yeah.
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 Yeah, it's not the steady stream, you know.
It's just really it gives it this forward motion, let's see, how can I say this in a way that's actually intelligible? It moves things along in a forward direction.
Right. Yeah.
Let's see. So the 2-finger style hits less notes and brings more focus on the notes that are played. I would say, wow, that's a really good question. I'm definitely playing less notes with my right hand. I may not be actually playing, you know, what's coming out of the front of the banjo may not be less notes. That's a kind of an open question. So I guess that the answer depends on if you are, you know, if you're trying to play No Mother or Dad, that would be one answer. If you're trying to play a fiddle tune, that would be potentially another answer. Because, you know, as I mentioned earlier, in this approach that I'm using to play these fiddle tunes, I'm trying to copy exactly what the fiddle's playing. I mean, like exactly. Phrasing and everything. There's certain things that are just you just can't get because it's a fiddle. So in terms of, am I playing less notes there as opposed to a fiddle? Then no. Let me play you another tune. This is something I've been. I love this double C tuning. And just as another quick little tangent, which is something that was just really very charming to me and very liberating, was one year the Jaybirds played at the Blythe Festival in California, which is in January. And the headlining band that year was the Lonesome River Band. And I'm a huge fan of Sammy Shelor's playing. He's one of those guys that you hear him play a couple notes and you know it's him. There's no mistaking it. And it's just so compelling. He's just such a great player. Anyway, one of the things that festivals will do a lot of times is that they'll ask members of different bands to put on workshops. And so they had asked Sammy to do a banjo workshop. And so, of course, I wanted to go because I love his playing. I just wanted to watch him play up close. And he sat down and played probably, his version of Cumberland Gap in double C tuning, which is really cool, or something like that, And then people are asking questions, and somebody asked a question about the melodic style. And Sammy just straight up said, "Hey, man, that's not really my thing, And he said, "I can play you a really bad version of Blackberry Blossom," which he proceeded to do. It wasn't bad. It was pretty good, but still, I can really see, and at the time I could really see the wisdom in his kind of going, well, this is not for me. I'm going to focus on my thing. And man, there's very few people that can touch him in any aspect of playing the banjo, especially trying to play like him.
Right.
So, I guess trying to wrap up that thought is that there's a huge amount of wisdom, I believe, in transcribing solos of your favorite players, of your banjo heroes and all that. But I also think that it's really important to figure out what you think sounds good. One of the reasons that I think that Earl Scruggs got to be as widely, his style got to be as widely copied as it did was that he was playing what he thought sounded right. He wasn't trying to copy what his older brother played or necessarily what Snuffy Jenkins was playing or, Don Reno or any of the other players from his generation. He was just trying to do what he thought sounded good. And so as a direct result of that, I believe he basically couldn't make a mistake because he was playing his style. And I think it's so important, to try to find your style, because then it's really, from my perspective, it's really fulfilling. It's kind of scary because, what if people don't like your style?
Well, oh gosh, I was probably 14 or 15 years old, and we had gone to a show here locally and saw Raymond Fairchild.
Oh, yeah.
And so Raymond let me play his old band. He had I guess it was that style one that he had back then. And, he hands it to me and I'm standing there picking it. And I guess he and Dad are talking or whatever. And then he turns to me and he says, you pick real good, boy. Just don't copy nobody. Mm. And it's like, oh, okay. Yeah. And so even at 14, I figured out that, the wisdom in what he had to say was, basically you kind of have to learn to be yourself. And
yes.
And I know that's hard from I hadn't been at that point, I hadn't been playing very long, but I guess long enough to understand that I could sit down with a Foggy Mountain Banjo album and learn Earl's breaks note for note, but that's not what I have to say.
I had a very interesting experience, and it's interesting to me how throughout your life, and I don't want to go all egghead philosophical, but it's very interesting to me that throughout your life you're presented with these opportunities, and sometimes you're kind of ready to take advantage of the opportunity, whatever the opportunity is. And the opportunity that I'm speaking directly about is that I remember playing at a festival in like, probably 95 or so, a festival in southwestern Washington State. And I was really into Earl Scruggs. My practice was like I would play the Foggy Mountain Banjo record for hours a day.
Yeah, I did that
all the time. And I can remember I was playing with this kind of local band there, and we got off stage, and someone walked up to me from the audience and said, "Wow, you sound just like Earl Scruggs." And my first internal reaction was, "Man, you need to get your ears checked, because I do not sound like Earl Scruggs." But fortunately, I didn't say that. But it got me to really thinking, and that is that, let's say it's 1995. In 1995, that person could have gotten in their car, driven to Seattle, gone to the SeaTac airport, bought an airplane ticket, flown to Nashville, driven out to wherever it was that Earl lived, went up and
on a drive, yeah.
and knocked on his door, and Earl might have let him in, and he would have actually been able to hear Earl Scruggs play. Right. So what advantage to me is it to be like a bad Xerox of a Xerox of a Xerox of a Xerox of Earl Scruggs, because he was still out playing at that time. I just, it took me a while to kind of really internalize that, but it's a real compliment to say you sound like your hero. There's no doubt in my head I had to get a new hat. But after I kind of realized the underlying truth behind that, it's like, wow, I got to start doing something different, because, Earl already exists. Who's going to want to pay to see a lame copy of him? But the tune that I've been working on, and I just want to quickly, is it totally uncool or gauche to like plug stuff?
No, plug everything. Please do.
Okay, so I have two albums that I put out. These two. This is an album of all original banjo tunes, which, just interestingly enough, in preparation for today, I actually went back and learned a couple of them, because, I don't have a band to play these with, so I don't, I recorded them, like, oh, that's cool, moving on. And then there's this one, which is a collection of old-time fiddle tunes played with, different musicians. John Reischman's on it, on several cuts, and it's fiddles and cellos and stuff. Anyway, I like it. And then I also have tab books that are available. There's this one, which is a transcription of all the solos on the Fiddle Tunes record, and then I have two books of old-time fiddle tune banjo music.
Oh man, I didn't know you had those.
Yeah, and you can order these, and I on my website, which is nickhornbuckle.com, and I actually have available for download a book of the solos from this record. So I would love to make printed copies of the original banjo solo book, but I don't know what the market is, so I'm not going to have 500 of them sitting around.
Well, let me tell you what I've done. So, back in the 90s, I had printed up these tab books, and I had, a stack of them. I had a local print shop do them, and I had a stack, and I was selling them. And I got down to 20 or 30 of them left, and I was so glad that they were almost gone. Yeah. It took forever to sell. And fortunately, interestingly enough, the last stack of them, Bill Keith bought all of them. I think he just felt sorry for me, but he bought them and took them back to New York, and he may have been using them with his students. But
that's great.
I just started selling just PDFs.
Yeah.
And, I set up my little web store. People pay for the PDF. They get, and it's pretty much hands off for me. And then I've done pretty well just selling just the PDF. So I bet you the market there for you would be very similar.
Yeah, I've got on my website, I've got the two albums available. You can buy physical CDs from me or from CD Baby or Amazon or whatever. You can also download the albums like on iTunes and Spotify. And I think Amazon you can do downloads. You can download your records from my website. I also sell the books, physical copies, through my website. But in addition to that, I also sell PDFs and MP3 downloads. And I have the books printed up because before all this, what we're going through now happened, you know, the Jaybirds were out playing a fair amount. So it was really good to have physical things to sell at a...
Oh, yeah. You got to have merch on the table.
At a gig. Although it's interesting is that the woman who plays bass in our band, Trisha Gagnon, is a really great singer and is one of my favorite people. And she makes organic jam that she sells. And so depending on where we are, if we have to fly, she won't take it because it's too heavy. But if we're driving somewhere, she'll take several cases of jam, and she absolutely cleans up because it's the best. I mean, literally, she entered her jam in a championship in Scotland and won first place in the world.
Oh, wow.
And so it's really it's very interesting to stand back at the record table and just watch her. She can't sell it fast enough because, you know, it's really good jam. And so I'm standing here with my banjo books, and once in a while a banjo person will walk up and kind of thumb through it and go, well, I'm just getting started. Is this going to help me? And I'm like, well, it might be a little bit, you know, maybe what you can do is go to my YouTube page and look at the stuff there and see if it flips your switch, then these will definitely help you. And if you decide you want one, then send me an email. I'll send you. So someone I'll be happy to send you a CD to Switzerland. All that you need to do is to go to my website and order it through there, and I will mail it from Nanaimo, British Columbia. And hopefully, you know, I shouldn't say hopefully, you'll definitely get it. It's not like if I was living in Seattle and was going to mail something to Jim, it would get there in 2 days. But when you mail stuff from Vancouver Island, it might take another couple extra days, especially getting to Switzerland. So
yeah, I had a good friend in Vancouver, Bob Bowden, that, you know, we would mail stuff back and forth, and he had a PO box in Seattle. You know, it just solved a lot of problems.
You know, I had been printing and mailing these tab books from the little town that I live in, and it just costs an arm and a leg, and I just didn't feel right about the additional mailing costs. And so I found a printer, a Minuteman Press in Lansing, Michigan, which just oddly enough is like, you know, just a handful of blocks away from Elderly Instruments. And I approached them, and they will print up a batch of books, and they'll actually mail them out for me from Lansing, which saves a ton on the cost, and it's much quicker, especially to people that live in the States. And I think to people who live in the UK and Europe too, I've sold several books to people in the UK and you know, France and Germany and Holland and so on. But anyway, so to answer your question, I'll be happy to send you a CD, order on my website, and it'll come in the mail. So the tune that I've been working on, and it, you know, it's some of these tunes. Some players, again, tangent, ding. But 3 or 4 years ago, I was on staff at a camp here in British Columbia called Nimble Fingers, which is over in the Sorrento, over in the shoe shop in the interior of British Columbia. Great camp. And two of the other instructors were Bruce Malsky and Allison DeGroot. And they're just such great players. And I was involved in a jam session with them one night with a young woman that plays fiddle with me, Miriam Sonstinis. And anyway, so we were playing tunes, and I watched Allison basically learning a tune as it was going down, as Miriam was playing or I were playing, whatever, I can't remember who it was. But I was just so impressed by that ability to hear it and play it. And for me, if it's a vocal tune, in other words, half notes and whole notes, quarter notes, I can get that pretty quick. But when it comes to fiddle tunes, I have to go and repair to my dungeon
Right.
and sit and figure it out, because it's still, I mean, I'm getting better at it. But so anyway, when I'm saying that I'm working on a tune, I mean, I literally have been playing this nonstop for like, you know, a week and a half once I transcribed it to my satisfaction. And then just
so when you start with a fiddle tune, you start with a fiddle player? Is that where you're?
Yes. What I do is that I'll start poking around, like on YouTube, if I have a recorded, like a CD or something where I hear a tune, that's a really great tune. I'll start finding different versions of it that I really like, because, you know, they're not all the same. Different players have different ways that they might play a certain phrase or something. And then I will try to incorporate that into the version that I play. Actually, you know, let me play a different tune, because this is a really good example. There's a tune. There's a tune. My daughter used to have a cat named Sally, and Sally liked to go outside, but Sally also liked to drink water out of the bathtub. There would always be little kitty footprints in the bathtub. So I was poking around on YouTube one day, and I heard David Brager, who's a really great old-time musician. I believe he's in Los Angeles. But he's got the old-time tiki parlor, and he's a banjo player and a fiddler, and really, really great player. I heard him playing a version of this tune called Sal's Got Mud Between Her Toes. Got a cat named Sal, she's got mud between her toes. It's perfect. So I learned the tune, and I really liked it. And when fiddle players play it, they'll play it in the key of D, which is double C up 2 K chords. But I just really like the way the banjo sounded in C. This kind of rings a bit more to me. So I don't know if this actually helps, but it makes it so I don't have to look at myself. So that's good.
Yeah, that's fun. I play that.
Cool. Right
I
on.
hadn't thought of that in forever. I thought, hey, that's a cool tune.
Well, it's just, you know, and believe me, I'm in absolutely no way meaning to compare myself to this guy, but there's a certain way that, like one of my favorite records is Banjo Sandwich, and there's a certain way that Alan Munde plays. It's just got this really great bounce to it. And I try to, in that tune in particular, and in most of the fiddle tunes I play, I try to, I guess it may not even be conscious, but I'm maybe try to subconsciously sort of adopt his rhythmic feel to a certain extent. I mean, it's impossible because we're different people, but I certainly was heavily influenced by him. I mean, he's a very cool guy. He's a very, very generous person and very down to earth, you know, which is very, very nice. Most of the really great musicians that I've ever met are, almost every one of them are very cool, humble people, and it's,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, I'm sure that they kind of, I don't know, who knows what's going on in someone's head. It's hard to say, but it's a very refreshing approach to being an expert at something instead of having some kind of a weird attitude about it. Just being, well, you know, in fact, years ago, a festival, Bluegrass, etc., was playing, and Dennis Caplinger was the banjo player in that band. And, you know, he's amazing. And it's really interesting to me that so few people know about him, because that guy, he can play. I mean, he's one of those guys that can play anything. And he not only plays the banjo really well, he plays the guitar, the mandolin, and the fiddle, and the pedal steel, everything. I mean, he's a studio guy. Anyway, so he was doing a workshop, and one of the questions was basically, the intent behind it was, "You're so great and we all suck." And he had this really great answer to it. Was, you know, he said, you know, and I'm paraphrasing, but basically it was, here's the thing, we're all on the same road, we're all going in the same direction. Some of us are here, some of us are a little bit further down the road that way, and some of us are a little bit further down the road that way, but we're all heading in the same direction. So, you know, it doesn't make any sense to have any kind of a inflated ego about any of it, because, you know, it's, everybody's on the same team, I suppose.
Yeah. Hey, I hope Steve's still here. I meant to answer this question for him earlier. He says he broke his ring finger on his left hand, quit the banjo for several years, and started playing again, but can't use that finger and using his pinky. Any suggestions? Well, my suggestion right off is go out and find videos of Barry Abernathy playing the banjo.
Yeah. Was that on his right hand or left hand?
Left hand.
Left hand. Yeah. I mean, Barry's amazing.
Yeah. And so, you know, my dad had a similar situation. He had an industrial accident and lost part of his ring finger on his left hand. He said, well, I guess that's it for guitar. And it's like, no, you can play without that finger, you know? And so, yeah, you just learn not to use it. And I mean, Barry Abernathy, if you're not familiar with him, he played Mountain Hard. He played with Dole Lawson, and he just lived right across the mountain here from me. And Barry has a thumb and really no fingers on his left hand. And
doesn't he have like a pointer finger or something?
Kind of part of a pointer finger. Yeah.
But it's you know, I can remember years ago playing with a local Seattle band. We were invited to play at the Father's Day Festival in Grass Valley, California, which takes place obviously Father's Day in June. And I was standing out in the crowd with the guy that played guitar in the band, who's a really, really great banjo player. His name is Rich Jones. He lives here he lives in the Seattle area. And we were watching Mountain Heart play, and they were playing like some really up-tempo Monroe instrumental. I get them all confused. I can't remember. But it was something really fast. And Peter Schwimmer. Perfect.
Yeah, go ahead.
So they were playing this tune, and Barry just absolutely tore it up. I mean, he nailed it. It was really incredibly impressive to watch. And actually, let me back up. It was incredibly impressive to hear, because he played it so well and just nailed it.
Yeah.
And then the fellow I was standing with saying, well, he does pretty good for a guy that's got half a hand. And I turned to him and I said, that guy does pretty good for someone who's got 4 hands.
Yeah, no kidding. No
I mean,
kidding.
there's absolutely no way that you would have known that there was any issue there, any physical issue there at all.
No, you know, and he came in my shop. This was, oh gosh, this was 25 years ago when he was still playing with Doyle, and him and Owen Saunders were traveling to meet Doyle, and he stopped by my shop one day and he picked up my mandolin. And, you know, and he's playing my mandolin, you know, it's like, okay, yeah, obviously there's our limitations are what we allow ourselves to have, obviously. So,
well, you know, and that brings to mind just another tangent. Ding is that great old John Hartford quote, which is that your style is determined by your limitations, or words to that effect. I think that's really interesting. That's a really interesting perspective to take, because what that says to me is don't look at it as a negative. I mean, when I first went to playing with 2 fingers, it really kind of freaked me out intellectually. I was just going, man, this is just really no good. I mean, and then I started to, you know, try to take a step back and to listen to what I was playing. And I realized, well, okay, this sounds good to me. You know, people in my band accept it. People that we play for accept it. No one's demanding their money back. And then the more that I started to pursue that and try to figure out how to incorporate that, you know, into a bluegrass context, and then how to incorporate it into trying to play these fiddle tunes, I realized that it's kind of an interesting approach, and there's not many people doing it. And so it kind of gives me, to a certain extent, kind of a unique sound, which, you know, unique can mean, boy, that really sucks. But it can also mean it's good. And so I choose to believe that it's more on the side of being good than on the side of sucking.
yeah.
But it's one of the things that it has done is it the tunes that I write, I'm more interested in making sure that I'm playing a melody or a tune instead of just a bunch of roll patterns over a chord sequence, which I try to not be judgmental, but I'm a human being and I listen to a lot of banjo music. Maybe it's just because I don't listen to the right kind of banjo music, but a lot of banjo music that I hear is kind of that. It's a bunch of rolls over a chord sequence, which I'm not really hearing much of a tune there. I mean,
it's just if you can't hum it.
Yeah, I'm not putting it down. I'm not, because, you know, whatever floats your boat is totally fine with me. It's just that for me, I would like to hear a tune that I can hum. Like, you know, that's one of the reasons that I love playing with John Reischman, is that his melodies that he writes are, you know, you can hum them. It's not just like this deedly-dee stuff. He can certainly do that, but the stuff that he writes is really interesting melodically, and it kind of reminds me of, do you ever hear this Miles Davis record? What is it? Is it Almost Blue or Kind of Blue?
Kind of Blue. Yeah, I'm trying to.
It's like this sort of mid-50s. It's this hugely influential jazz record. And on that record, and I'm no jazz guy, but on that record, what Miles did, to my understanding, is that he wrote these melodies that are fairly simple. They're not simple-minded, but they're fairly simple. And then just turned his band loose and said, do what you're going to do. And because there's this real simple framework to hang stuff on, it makes it possible to play the tune, but also to go into outer space if you want to. I think that's a really wise approach, you know, for better for worse.
Let's see. I want to geek out in a minute, but
Sure.
we'll ask let Jeff ask his problem swapping roles without taking a second to think about it. Well, Jeff, I don't know how long you've been playing, but at some point, you find, I don't remember who it was talked about it, but, you know, they were kind of breaking down Earl's playing and talked about, really didn't think about roles so much, but was pivot points, you know, and this was something I remember reading about 30 years ago, but it was like there are places in the roll that set you up to go back a different direction. And man, that just comes in doing it a bunch. You'll get better. When I was a kid learning to play a bunch of the Ralph Stanley stuff, especially coming at it, started with Earl, then listening to Ralph, it's like Ralph would be going this direction and then suddenly he'd be going another direction. Just boom, there's just be this huge change. And it's like, I don't know how he did it. And after, sitting with it and then trying to listen and figure out where that pivot point, where he could actually make that roll go another direction, then it all started to make sense. And gosh, a lot of what you're going to discover, I think, is just going to be from sitting and playing those rolls, and just especially, going from one to another at different places. It's that ugly word that none of us want to hear. It's practice.
Well, and if I can just tag on to that very last thing you said, it's not just practice, although that's absolutely the truth, but it is like really really focused practice, really super critical. I mean, that's why I've never met Tony Rice, but I can only imagine that the guy is super critical of his playing, because you don't get to be good unless you're just like, you hear every little mistake. Same with Earl. I mean, I don't think that these great musicians get to be that great unless they're just really, 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 really critical. And you don't want to tip over the edge and just go, I suck so much, I'm going to quit playing. But you want to be very critical of your playing in a good, positive way. But
listen. I tell my students all the time, listen to what you're playing, and analyze it. And the other thing I tell a lot of my students is, like, don't listen to your mama. Your mama's going to tell you you're just fantastic. You just, take the compliment, smile, thank you, but you still have to be just almost hypercritical of your playing to get it to a point to where, just be critical. Yeah, totally agree.
One of the things that I found, I do teach lessons, so if people are interested in lessons, you can email me about that. But and it's all pretty much nowadays online. But one of the things that I discovered, a couple things that I discovered from teaching people, I had a really good friend of mine who was a student. He was an anacordist named Harold Saxon, really, really great guy. We were talking about he was able to play up to a certain beats per minute. It was about 80 beats per minute.
Right.
And then once it got past that, he was having a hard time doing that. And what I kind of realized was he was either consciously or subconsciously thinking thumb, index, middle, thumb, index, middle, thumb, index, middle. And there's an upper limit beats per minute that you can actually intellectually with your brain think that, once it gets past that point, it needs to be something that you don't really think about. It needs to be just something that you have internalized. And one of the things that I've found that can be really helpful in memorizing roll patterns that doesn't involve thinking thumb, index, thumb, middle, or thumb, index, middle, is to try to sit down with a metronome and identify what the inherent groove is in each of these roll patterns. Yeah. So, for example, let me just play something here. Put a, let me slow this down a little bit. So if you play a forward roll, play this, you can see what I'm doing, if that's interesting at all.
Yeah, I was one of this.
So the groove of that pattern against the click has a certain feel to it. So then let's look at a different roll pattern, like what you would call a square roll, which is, if you play it properly, it's thumb, index, thumb, middle. I'll do thumb, index, thumb, index. So it's very square sounding, as opposed to So the reason that I mentioned that, is if you can sit down with a timekeeping device of some sort and just start to get a handle on what the built-in groove is to each of these patterns, I think that it makes it easier to internalize the way that you're moving your fingers, because you're not thinking about the fingers, you're thinking about the groove you're creating. And like, as an example, the tune that I played first, that No Mother or Dad, there's this certain quality in the groove. I hope that word makes sense to people, but it's like it's the rhythmic feel of what's the banjo's doing. There's a certain inherent groove that Earl got by using predominantly forward rolls in that tune, you know. And I'm gonna accentuate it, but just, you know. So on and so forth. Whereas if you were to play with the square roll, you know, it's a really different feel.
Yeah.
Because those two patterns are to be used to communicate different feelings, different grooves. And you know, I hope that makes sense. That's the way I think about it. And I think that with trying to teach someone how to do that, it's like I should follow my own advice, because I've tried over the years to learn how to play climber, and I just can't get the groove of it. But the idea of internalizing that feeling instead of trying to intellectually think about what fingers you're moving is, I think, really advantageous.
Hey, show me how you play a forward roll, Nick.
Okay, so I'm going to call a forward roll. It's to my way of thinking, it's a 3-note roll. It's
right.
There's a lot of people that will say a forward roll is like an 8-note pattern, and I don't agree with that. I think that that's not
yeah. I think I agree with you. To me, when I think forward roll, I think of a direction. You know,
like it's starting in your thumb and going in that direction.
Exactly.
And like so then a backward roll or reverse roll would be. I don't use that one very much.
So your right hand pattern for that forward roll is thumb middle or index. Yeah, thumb index. That's so neat. And so how long did it take to get some pretty good speed double thumbing like that?
Well, it depends on what you mean by good speed.
Yeah, well,
I've actually, you know, I have tapes of me playing when I was, this is probably in like 97, 98, and I played in this band with John, and we were doing the Random and Rag, and I just was absolutely, and I don't, you know, I can hear all the mistakes in it, of course, but it's really fast, and it's really good. It's 3-finger, and there's absolutely no way I could do that now. So if we're talking about that, you know, 170 beats a minute, I can play that fast, but it's not going to sound like that. It's going to sound different. It's going to sound like the way that I play it. So to answer your question, to get to that speed, to a speed that's like, you know, we don't really play like, you know, Shady Grove at 180 beats a minute like Ricky Skaggs does. And to be quite honest, I don't know how many people there are out there that can actually do that and make it sound good. Russ Carson can do it. Jim Mills can do it. I mean, there are certain people that can really do that. And I'm not really, you know, like I always say, Ricky Skaggs is not ringing my phone off the hook. I'm not in any danger of being asked to join the band. So I'm going to try to focus on what I can do and what I can do well. So anyway, in answer to your question, if I've been playing a bunch, we've been out on the road, it seems like I don't have any issues playing fast, but then I'm not trying to play a forward roll in a consistent, steady manner I'm using other techniques, left-hand techniques, leaving notes out judiciously that, you know, I mean, one of the things that, okay, I haven't answered your question yet. That's, you know, I don't really know, because when that happened in my living room, I was playing Fireball Mail. I mean, what's that, 130 beats a minute?
Yeah, something like that.
It was instantly there. And that's not a breakdown, but it's not slow. It's mid-tempo. It's, you know, and it's, and I was able to play the other tunes on that record at tempo. I don't play them anymore, so it would take me a while to get it back together. But it's not something that I really had to struggle with. But if I wanted to play a real consistent forward roll, you know, I can probably top out about 145, 150 beats a minute, and that's if I've been really playing a lot.
That's pretty quick, you know. With the band with the Ramblers, you know, we did some stuff that was, you know, pretty good clip, but you know, we rarely got out of the 150s. I mean, that was quick. You know, and there was a thing or two that we did that was, you know, just absolutely blistering.
And you can play fast.
Yeah, well, but still, not like I used to. You know, it's just like,
well, you know, I mean, it's a really interesting thing to me. Is that I keep saying that. God, I got to come up with a different thing to say. But it is interesting to me. Is that years ago I was sitting on the porch with my brother-in-law, and we were sitting out there drinking and smoking. I don't do either of those anymore, thank God. But we're just talking, and I was complaining about the fact that it seems like it's just such a stupid thing to complain about. But I was complaining about, it seemed like every time I sit down with my banjo, there's a tune there to write. It just makes itself known to me. And I was kind of complaining about it. I was like, oh God. He goes, are you kidding me? You should, if it was me, I would stop worrying about trying to sound like someone else, and I would work on that.
right.
And I come back and I touch that every once in a while and realize that that's really good advice, you know. So I will sit down with my banjo and just start playing and just start dinking around, and all of a sudden there's a tune. So I've got, like, now it's probably close to 80 or 100 tunes that I've got on various hard drives and tapes and everything that, and, you know, not all of them are super great, but I think that it's really good to invest the time and the effort in writing music. You know, that's what whenever we play and somebody who's just getting started or a young musician asks for my advice, which they, you know, a lot of times don't, which is fine. But I always say, start writing now, because you got to write all the bad stuff out of your system.
I wrote an article once about, you know, students would ask me in different workshops, and people would, you know, say, how much do I need to, what do I need to practice to get to this level? You know, and it's like, well, what level? You know, well, what if I want to be as good as Bela Fleck? You know, so the main thing, my thing is, the main thing is, if you want to get to that level, you've got to practice something different, and you have to learn to create, because that's what Bela does differently than everybody else. He's amazing technician, obviously, but the thing that Bela excels at is creation. And how do you get good at creating things? You start by just creating absolute junk.
Yes.
And you just have to, you know, you create lots of stuff. And so, you know, if you want to get to that level of a Bela Fleck or an Alison Brown or a Noam Pikelny, you got to start creating stuff. You know,
yes, absolutely.
Because that's also where you're going to find your voice on the instrument and not somebody else's.
Right. Yeah. That's, you know, that is absolutely, you know, it's interesting. There are different sort of levels of achievement that a musician goes through. And, you know, one of them is, oh my God, I can't believe I learned that lick. This sounds kind of like my hero. This is really great. And then you get to a point where you're like, well, yeah, that is great, but I'm not them.
Yeah.
And then you kind of start over again, you know.
Right.
You kind of hopefully have gotten some kind of technical expertise in your fingers, But then you kind of have to throw all that away. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I love to write and play in different tunings, because to a large extent, Earl Scruggs never did it. I mean, one of the hardest things I can try to think of if I want to challenge myself is to try to write a banjo tune in open G tuning without quoting Scruggs. It's really
It's like impossible.
Yeah, because I don't play in that melodic style, so I'm not thinking about it in that kind of technique. I'm thinking about it in Earl Scruggs style. And so it's by going into different tunings, there are different possibilities that present themselves that Earl never had to deal with. And so just because of that, I'm forced to come up with something different, and it leads in a different pathway.
See, I do that, but I do that in a different way. So since I play both bluegrass and old time, I almost never play any clawhammer tunes, any old time tunes. I don't play them out of standard G tuning simply because my brain will revert back to what's bluegrass. And even if I'm playing a clawhammer style, I'm going to revert back. My left hand is going to know things. And so for me, the alternate tuning forces me to think differently. So like if, somebody calls a G tune at an old time jam, I will immediately tune to an old left tuning and capo up.
Yeah.
And that gives me G, and I'm not in standard G, but now I have to think differently. And so I feel like I sound more old timey than sounding like bluegrass played in a clawhammer fashion, but again, that tuning is
and the tunings are like I say, one of the interesting things about the banjo, and this just really speaks to the genius of a guy like Earl Scruggs, is that he figured out how to use the instrument's natural voice to its best, in its best to its advantage. What's that? Okay. And that's, he played an open G tuning predominantly. And so when you play an open G tuning and you're playing something in the key of G, there's a lot of strings rubbing up against each other. And I use that in the sense that they are contributing to the overall harmonic sound, but you may not be hitting them. Just because they're vibrating in sympathy, is long story short. So in these different tunings, those sympathetic vibrations are different, and they present different possibilities melodically, because there's certain tones that are going on that aren't. Man, I'm really getting into the weeds on this. Sorry. Just give me some more rope and it'll.
We're fine.
There's just certain tones that are presented in different tunings that aren't there in standard G tuning. Man, I brought it back home. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Hey, can I play you?
Please do.
A tune on my record is. So this tuning is. I've heard it described many different ways. What it is basically is it's a G sustained chord, so you're raising the B string up to a C. Do you call that sawmill, or what is that called?
Yeah, sawmill, G modal.
G modal.
Yeah.
So this tuning is actually that tuning structure, but lowered a half step. So instead of it being G, it's F sharp. And I had originally written this tune in I think in standard G with that altered tuning. But then for some reason I was dinking around with it just down a half step, and I really liked the way that the banjo, the timbre, the tone of the instrument sounded just slightly lower, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, you know, I'm not going to play this with a band. Who cares what key it's? I mean, I actually on the record I got a really great bass player to play, and Trent plays fiddle on it. He's an amazing fiddle player. But there's just something about the way that that this instrument sounds in that particular modal tuning down a half step that just is, to me, sounds really cool. I like the way it sounds. So this is probably not technically really in tune, but it sounds like it's in tune with itself. So this is the title cut of the record. It's called 13 or so, and it's amazingly hard to play, but it's so simple because it's just me. I can't hide behind a rhythm guitar player or something. So there's that.
That's fantastic.
Thank you. I kind of screwed up a couple parts, but that's because I'm nervous. All these people are watching me that I don't know.
I know, right? We don't know who they are. There's just numbers. Now, you know, you were talking about tuning and tuning down for different tones. So I've got a friend, David Power. He's a piper, plays uilleann pipes. He's from Ireland, and he's got this set of pipes. It's a historical set, and it's an 18th set pipe. And people always ask him, and so, what is that, a B flat set? And he says, well, no, it's not. It's somewhere between a B flat and a B. I mean, it's just it's in tune with itself, and so
there's a certain. I mean, I don't know if it came through, and I kind of. If you want to hear how that tune really sounds, listen to the record. You can go to my website, just listen to it. Right. But there's a certain timbre, there's a certain resonance that's different instruments sort of like different things, different tunings or different keys or whatever. I mean, you hear some bluegrass banjo players their banjos just sound amazing in the key of B. You know, it's just like, oh my God, that's just really great. But you take that same banjo and you put it back down into regular G tuning, and it kind of doesn't sound all that great. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like certain instruments really favor.
Yeah, totally.
So there's a radius fretboard. I don't know, Jim, do you use a radius fretboard?
I did for a short period of time, and honestly, I can't tell any difference. You know, I'm not. I know Eli Gilbert has got. He's got a banjo right now it's a Huber with a radius fingerboard, and you know he likes it, and you know I've played just a flat fingerboard for 40 something years, so I don't know that it makes a whole lot of difference to me. Well, let's talk Banjo Geek stuff.
Can I just tag on something that you said there? Is that, in my opinion, and this is because I'm just a working guy, the thing is that my advice would be that if you're thinking about doing something like that, you know, as another example, if you're left-handed and you want to have someone custom make you a left-handed banjo, and you're just getting started, you might want to really think about the cost of investment, left-handed banjo, radius fretboard, versus the ability to turn around and sell that if you don't like it.
Right.
Because, you know, radius fretboards, some people really like them, some people don't, but it is something that is, in the banjo world, as far as I can tell, a little bit out of the ordinary.
Right.
So for some people, it may be, you know, that's not a bug, it's a feature, but other people, that's not a feature, that's a bug.
Right.
So if you can, try it out. I mean, I think I've maybe played a radius fretboard. My bass is radius, but it's a very gradual. And you know, and in order for me to justify spending the $1,100-$1,500 it would be to get a radius neck just to find out if I like it or not. I couldn't do that.
Yeah, right.
I got a mortgage to pay, you know. It's like, okay, so you wanted to
Banjo Geek. Tell me about your banjo. What do you play?
Okay, so this banjo is it's a mid-30s TB. Some people call them 11. Some people call them 1-1s, but it's a kind of banjo that doesn't have a tone ring in it. It just has a little hoop, like a piece of welding rod on top of the horn.
Is that what you play with, John?
Yes. Yeah. So it's got this kind of a perloid back. I had mentioned Craig Smith earlier, and if people out there are not aware of him, you need to rectify that situation post-haste, because he's one of the best players that's ever picked up a banjo, and he has one, if not two, solo records, and he was a really in-demand studio guy back in the 90s. He played on a lot of Laurie Lewis records and
Ronnie Bowman and a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, and he was in a band called Ash and W. Just really, really great player. Anyway, so I had met Craig and was familiar with him and friendly with him, and I saw him play at a festival one time, and he was playing. I knew that he had a Hearts and Flowers Granada. I believe it's a pre-war Granada. And anyway, so Craig was on stage playing and just sounding great, sounded really good. And I went backstage and said, "Hey, man, you just sound so great. Is that your Granada?" And he takes it off and he hands it to me. And it's like light.
Yeah.
I'm like, what's this? And then, you know, because at that point in time, just in general, my understanding is severely lacking. But you know, my understanding of banjos was, if it doesn't have a tone ring, it's just not worth it. You just, you know, that's something that you would play if you were Grandpa Jones or something. I mean, you can't be a serious player if you don't have a tone ring, because everybody knows that's. And I got to talking to him about it, and I just, after hearing him play and talking to him about it, I realized that I wanted to find one, you know. So anyway, the Jaybirds were teaching at Rocky Grass one year, and I'm a big fan of, you know, Jens Kruger, just not only as a player, but as a person. He's a really, really generous, cool guy. And I was hanging out with the young guy who was their sound engineer at the time in the beer garden. Like I said, he used to drink. And we're just, you know, chewing the fat. And I don't remember if Jens was there. Maybe he was. But we got to talking about banjos, and you know, Jens is affiliated with Deering, and so I was trying to talk to him about maybe getting some kind of a deal on a Deering, because they make great banjos. And somebody in the conversation said, well, what banjo would you really like? And I said, well, I'm really looking for an old style 11.
Mm-hmm.
And this young sound engineer, Philippe, says, oh, well, this guy might be able to help you out. It turns out this guy's a fellow by the name of Jack Davis, who I think lives in Denver. And turns out Jack had at that time several banjos, and one of them was a style 11. And I said, so is that something you'd be interested in parting with? And he goes, well, what would you give me for it? And I said, well, what would you ask for? You know, back and forth. And at that time, I had bought like a Style 3 copy from this guy named Wyatt Foley.
Yeah.
Really great banjo. And I had it as kind of a backup. And I said, well, it's kind of, you know, it doesn't really matter at this point because I'd have to sell something in order to buy it. He goes, well, what are you selling? And I said, well, I have one of these Wyatt Foley retro tones. He goes, oh, I've always wanted one of those. And I said, okay, well, let's talk business. So he ended up sending me this banjo. It was a 4-string, and it's got the Gibson Kalamazoo sticker in the pot.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
But the peg head said SS Stewart.
Okay.
It's a different shaped peg head, you know, because Gibson used to make banjos for basically whoever would. But it still had the Gibson sticker in the didn't have a serial number. Anyway, so he sends me this 4-string banjo, skinhead, you know, and I literally played the 4th string, and I'm keeping it, you know, because I really felt it. The back of the resonator was moving.
Right.
And so then I sent the whole thing to Frank Mead. He broke the neck, and so I've been playing this banjo pretty much exclusively since like, I don't know, 2002, 2 or 3 or something. I don't remember exactly. And it did take me a long time to get it sounding good, because I don't, you know, like I say, where I live, there just is not a lot of people who know anything about banjos. And so I was kind of on my own. It was just, I didn't have a lot of things figured out. But once I got the right bridge and the right head tension, and it started to really sound good. And now I absolutely love it. You know,
yeah, it sounds great. I mean, on the recording, y'all understand over this stream, everything's so awfully compressed, and like most of the sound is gone. But I mean, yeah, it's a good sounding banjo. What kind of pick do you use? I was going to ask what kind of finger picks, but what kind of finger pick do you use?
There's a guy that I know who lives in Phoenix. His name is Dick Brown. He's a really good banjo player, and I would see him every once in a while, you know, 10, 15 years ago. And we would always compare our stash of vintage National finger picks.
Right.
And then when I went to One Finger, he goes, dude, your collection just doubled. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. So anyway, the finger pick that I use is, I think that it's like a 70s National.
Okay.
It's I don't know if I hold this up, this is,
yeah,
it's so disoriented to figure out which way it is. Completely backwards. It's one of those where it's the holes are not centered in the band. Man, I'm just completely.
Yes, you wouldn't make a dentist, you know, working in the mirror. Yeah.
It's and I would not be able to cut my own hair. I end up with a big, but so it's the blade is pretty flat. And I kind of like that flat blade. I've got a few of those. I might have a couple of patent pendings, and I certainly have the pre-USA, several of those. But the shape of the pick is more like a spoon. It's more dish shape. And I kind of feel like I get a more solid tone out of the flat blade. And you can kind of see, if I can figure out how to do this again, you can kind of see where the wear pattern is. It's not exactly down the middle, but it's pretty close to the middle.
Yeah, you do good. I'm terrible. I have such bad right hand posture. I play on the sides of my picks pretty, and always have.
Well, I mean, I go through this too. Is it's like, and I changed the shape of my pick this morning because I can't leave it alone. But periodically I'll look at, like, I would watch Craig play the banjo, and the way he plays is really interesting because he just puts down his pinky finger, and he's got his fingers curled pretty significantly, and so as a result of that, his picks are bent really around the tip of his finger. And I'll once in a while think, well, I make this really false equivalency, which is, well, Craig's a great player and his picks look like that, so therefore, if I want to be a great player, then I should, it doesn't work like that.
Well, yeah, filing the gap between my front teeth never helped,
Smoking Pall Malls and wearing it over one shoulder,
yeah. Did you ever wear your strap over your right shoulder?
Of course.
Yeah, we all did. Yeah.
Yeah, it's something that it's very beneficial to be, I don't want to go all Zen, but it's very beneficial to be generous with yourself at all times, and especially generous with yourself when you look back at, personally, some of the stupid things I did, like putting my band over one shoulder. That's like, I remember going to the doctor one time and him looking at my back and saying to my mom, "Oh my God, this kid's got scoliosis." And she goes, "No, he just plays the banjo." And he goes, "Oh, okay." Exactly.
Yeah, we all look like Kenny Ingram,
And I can't. I mean, I watch Greg Cahill play, and he's one of my favorite players, and I can't understand how he has that thing over one shoulder.
Yeah.
Because the last time I saw him was about a couple months ago in Bellevue, and he's playing a regular tone ring banjo. It's not like a light instrument. I don't know how he does it.
Yeah, I swapped over to my left shoulder somewhere in the early 90s. It's like, no, I got to go over here.
Yeah.
It's like, why didn't I do this sooner? Because
another really great player that has it over his right shoulder is, do you know Keith Little?
Yeah. He plays from California.
Yeah. He was in Ricky Skaggs' band, and he was in
played with Grisman. Yeah,
played with Grisman. Great player, very incredibly unique player. He's another one of those guys that you hear him playing. Oh, it's Keith. There's no doubt. But he plays with it over one shoulder, and I just I keep thinking to myself, man, I wish I'd gone to chiropractic school because
What kind of thumb pick you use?
It varies, but the one I'm using now is like an old. I don't think that's blood on there, but it's an old white national from like the 70s.
Right.
I just had a stash in my stash box, but I'll change now and then. The interesting thing to me is that, or interesting thing to me is that I have some of these picks that are they look like old nationals. I think these are Golden Gates.
Yeah.
But the thing about them is that they're larges, and so the blade is quite a bit, noticeably longer than the national. Right. And every once in a while, because I don't know, I get bored or I'm just trying to get that little bit extra out of it, I'll go and I'll try to use a different thumb pick. But I always come back to this shape. It's a medium national, and there are other companies that make them similar to that. And it's a fairly round tip.
Mm-hmm.
These things, I've been using this thing for a long time. It just doesn't seem to be wearing down. I don't know. That's
awesome.
I must not be doing it right, because it looks like it's new.
Yeah.
This finger pick has got the tip is still
nice and round.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I've been using this pick for 15 years.
Okay. Yeah.
So I don't know what to say.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Did you try the blue chip? Did anybody give you any of those to try? Metal band with the pad material.
When those came out, everybody was just really up on them. So I bought two, and I tried them, and they just didn't work for me. And I think that the main reason is, well, a couple of reasons. Maybe I didn't give it enough time, because there's always that possibility. But the main thing to me is that the metal band was just really cutting into my cuticle on my thumb, and it was distracting. You know, I didn't. It, you know, Pro Pick makes this kind of thumb pick that's got kind of a hollowed out metal band, and I used this for a long time. But when I used it, I had to wrap it in like several layers of Band-Aid to make, because it just was so uncomfortable on my thumb. These plastic picks must be because I'm used to them, but they're just very comfortable.
Yeah, I had used Peter Schwimmer's talking about the Dunlop Ultex thumb pick. I guess that's what he's using, and those are pretty comfortable.
Are those the ones that are? It's kind of like
they're gold colored.
Yeah, gold colored. You know, actually, man, another tangent. The fellow that plays guitar in the Jaybirds now is a guy named Patrick Sauber, and Patrick he's really an amazing musician. I mean, he's a really, really, really great banjo player, and a really, really, really great guitar player. And as John says, he plays mandolin a little too well. But I remember about a year and a half ago, Patrick saying that he'd been talking to this other friend of his, a guy named Gabe Hirschfeld, who's another great banjo player.
Yeah. And
that Gabe was really up on those thumb picks that Peter was just mentioning. And so I actually went and ordered a bag of them off of Amazon. But, you know, in my experience, you buy one of something, it finds out this is the one, and then they stop making them. So when I buy something like that, I buy several, because you never know.
Well, yeah, I experienced it. So like my finger pick story, you know, I'm using these Ernie balls, and this is a case of do as I say and not as I do. I never recommend these to anybody, but when I had been playing a while, and I stepped on my good finger pick, or one of my good finger picks, and when I tried to straighten it out, well, I broke it. Well, I wasn't anywhere where I could get any picks, but somebody at a contest had given me a set of these Ernie Ball picks, and they were in the case, and it's like, well, I guess I'm using these, you know, until I can get to the store and get some picks. Well, I got used to them. Yep. Then, I don't know, 10 years ago, Ernie Ball decided we're not going to make those anymore. And it's like, well, dang, because they wear out. I mean, these really do wear out. So I bought like 2 gross of these picks. So I got just, it's like, I'm not going to be without picks, and I'm not going to have to. And at this point in my life, I'm too old to readapt to another style of pick. So I'm the same way. I'll buy several just in case, you know.
Right. So back to those picks that Peter was talking about. So I got them and I tried them, and they fit real well, but they were just a little bit. There wasn't enough of a good, to my ear, bottom end to them.
Right. Well, that's what he was saying, that they sound as bright as a metal finger pick. Yeah.
And so just an interesting another tangent about the Ernie Ball picky picks is when I first learned how to play, if you look at the cover of Foggy Mountain Banjo, the picks that Earl's wearing look very much like Ernie Ball picks. And so
they do.
You know, I mean, literally, when I started, I had a record. It was a reissue on Columbia of a bunch of dear old Dixie. And so I had a record. I had a record player that went to 16. And I had a picture of Earl Scruggs. That's all I had. And so in one of the pictures I had, Earl's wearing these picks. I'm like, well, that's what you got to wear. That's what you wear. So I went to the local sort of hippie store, and they sold all kinds of stuff, but they also had picks for some reason. And they had a box of those picky picks and a box of these nationals like this.
Right.
So nationals, I want the picky pick. So I used those for a long time. And then finally, whenever I try to use the nationals, they just always sounded so dark and scratchy to me. Like I didn't know you could polish. I mean, I wasn't a smart kid. So I used those Ernie Balls for the longest time. And then finally, I just decided, no, I've got to try this other thing. And so then I tried the Nationals, really liked them.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's, people ask on picks all the time, find one you like and
Yes.
hang with that, because, I see people, say, well, you just can't get good tone with those. And I'm going, well, I feel like I get okay tone, but you got to give yourself time to learn to use them. Kind of like those Ultex thumb picks. They are bright.
Right.
And
absolutely. And for some
I
people,
have no complaints about Peter Schwimmer's banjo tone.
no, absolutely not. That he's a really amazing player on a number of levels. He's another one of those guys that can play pretty much anything.
Yeah.
He's not someone who's just locked into doing one thing.
Yeah.
But a couple of interesting things that have happened to me that I remember when I'm thinking about tone and tone production is I remember years and years ago sitting around a jam session at this really great festival in Darrington, Washington, and trading banjos with a couple of banjo picking buddies of mine. And, one guy had a Stelling and one guy had a Gibson Earl Scruggs. And I think I had a Deering Golden Era. And there might've been a fourth banjo that was something else. Cause this is like, 95 or so. And we were swapping banjos around. And what we kind of realized was that within certain tolerances, everyone kind of sounded like themselves on each different banjo.
Yeah.
And there was a point in time where, I was working at print shops. I was making pretty good money, Andy, and I had a Deering Golden Era, which is really a great banjo. And I decided the only way I'm going to sound more like Earl's if I get a Granada. Well, Granadas are a little bit too expensive, so Rich and Taylor had a Sonny Osborne model, which is bladed curly maple. So I bought one of those. And for the first 2 weeks, I loved it. It's like this really bright crystal top end and nice thuddy bottom. Like, this is great. And then after about 2 weeks later, kind of got back to sounding like me. So I thought, well, clearly it's just not that. It's the banjo. It's not. So then I ended up buying a Rich and Taylor Don Reno, which is, I think it was
mahogany. Yeah.
And nickel plating.
Yeah.
Same thing. First couple of weeks, like, oh, this is the bomb. This is awesome. After a couple of weeks, like, back to sounding just like me. And so I finally realized, oh, it's not the banjo, it's me. I mean, I was able to sell those instruments, thank God. And so that getting back to this banjo here is going forward with that kind of understanding and that kind of attitude is that within certain tolerances, as long as the instrument is set up well, it's got new strings, it's got a good bridge, and the tone that it's going to produce comes down to me. I can't blame it on the banjo. So when I found this particular banjo without a tone ring, you wouldn't be because you're a smart guy, but you would be an average person would be amazed at the number of people that don't realize that there's no tone ring in this.
Right.
And then on top of that, when I did with the record table, I talked to people and they no tone ring. And then they finally kind of realize I'm only playing with two fingers. They just go, their head just, it's a really interesting thing to watch.
But Craig Smith played that, no tone ring banjo. And last time I saw Junior Williams, that's what he was playing, so.
I think that it's, if I've got another banjo that's like a typical bluegrass flathead banjo. It's really great. Mid-30s rims, got a Huber triple gold back when Steve first came out with those. And the rest of the banjos made and put together by Frank Mead. It's a great sounding banjo. And I once in a while, the last tour that the Jaybirds went on, I just took that one because I figured that's just, fun to play it. But I always come back to this one because there's something about the tone, the way that it sounds when I'm playing well, this banjo is very responsive. A lot of the tone room banjos that I played or owned, I kind of felt like I had to play really hard to get something out of it. But this one is just, you probably couldn't hear it, but earlier in our conversation, as you were speaking, it was speaking to you.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like
mine are here talking to me. That's the reason I got the one turned around backwards because it was.
Yeah, I absolutely love that about a banjo because it means that you don't have to play it hard. It's very responsive. I really like that.
Yeah. Well, Nick, we've been here over 2 hours. Can you believe it? Can you believe it?
Oh, that's too funny. I really enjoyed this, Jim. Thanks so much, and thanks to everybody who took part in this. I hope that any questions that you had were answered. I hope I didn't lead you.
Well, you know, just the conversation is great, and for folks just to be able to listen in. I mean, I've learned stuff, and I know they did. Y'all visit Nick's website, www.nickhornbuckle.com. He's got his tab books. You can order his CDs, but you can find him on iTunes and Google Play and Amazon and Spotify.
Yes.
But buy physical product if you can. That helps way more than you think.
Yeah, and I have if people are interested, I do have a YouTube channel that's under my name, and on that channel, I play several of the tunes that are available in the tab books, just to give you an idea what they sound like.
Yeah, y'all do that. Go to Nick's YouTube channel and subscribe. I've got his Instagram there in the little scrolling bottom thing. So be sure to follow Nick on Instagram. And if you want to donate for his time, there his PayPal me. So feel free to do that too.
Yeah.
Man, thank y'all for coming out. This has been a lot of fun. Nick, I appreciate you doing this. So maybe we can do this again sometime.
I would absolutely love to. To be totally honest, when I play with the band, once in a while I'll get some nerves before I go on stage, but I've been with that band for over 20 years, and I know everybody in the band so well, so with them so well. I know the music, but I was pretty nervous about this.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's the great unknown for sure. But man, really appreciate you doing this, folks. Thanks for Terry found out about you in Banjo newsletter. Yeah.
Yeah, Donald Nitchie has been really very supportive of me in particular. And I have to throw a really good shout out to Pete Warnick, who's been hugely in my corner.
Pete's a good guy.
Can I just say something really quick? I'm not sure if you got the album that had the sticker on it.
I have no sticker.
Okay. And this is, I hope that this doesn't come off completely cringy. And now that I say that, I'm kind of realizing maybe I shouldn't say it, but I can't help myself.
Do it.
A couple years ago at IBMA, I was about 2/3 of the way through recording this album, this original tunes record. And I've known Pete for several years, and he's always been very supportive of me, very, very generous person. Anyway, I ran into him at IBMA, and I said, "Hey, man, I'm working on this album of original material, and I don't know if it's any good. I can't tell anymore. Can I send you some mixes and get your opinion?" Because when you're working on, as you know, when you're working on something like that, you can't hear it anymore. I mean, it's just so hard to tell. So, like that next spring, late spring, I finally had about 5 or 6 tracks that I felt were ready for him to listen to. And so I sent him like 6 tunes, and basically within the amount of time it would take someone to listen through them, he emailed me back and said, "Man, this is fantastic. This is really good stuff. I'm really looking forward to hearing more of it." And he said, "Do you mind if I send this to a banjo playing friend of mine?" And I said, "Yeah, sure. Send it to whoever you want to. I don't care. I mean, the more people that hear it, the better." And I didn't think anything about it. And so about a month and a half, 2 months later, I'm sitting here at the house, and it's Sunday afternoon. I'm making myself lunch, and I get this email back from Pete Warnick, and he says, "Hey, just want to let you know that banjo playing friend of mine is Steve Martin, and he and he loves it." And I'm like,
"Oh, that's awesome."
And he said, "In fact, this is what he sent to me." And he said, "That's when I have the album for sale at the record table, there's a little sticker that has quotes on it."
Yeah.
And the quote from Steve is it's so beautiful and something I don't remember, And so he said, Pete said, "When you are ready to release the album, let me know, and I'll see if Steve would let you use that as a blurb." I said, "Oh." Wow. So then I finally got the thing done, got all the artwork done, got it mastered, got it. And I guess Pete reached out to Steve, and Steve said, yeah, absolutely, go ahead, which is really, you know, I mean, Steve Martin's one of the first guys I ever saw play the banjo, right? You know, so to have him not only like it, but be willing to let me use him to promote my record is really great. And I'm very grateful to Pete for facilitating that. You know, it's pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, Steve's right. It is brilliant and it is beautiful.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
It's amazing. And, you know, I'll be scrolling YouTube, and you know how YouTube will give you recommendations, and you're always one of my recommendations.
Oh, really?
Almost always. And it's like, I guess because I've listened to all of them so much. But y'all go out to YouTube and subscribe to Nick's channel, and follow him on Instagram. And buy his stuff, spend dollars. And all right, folks, thanks for coming out. I'm going to hit the button. We'll see y'all soon.
Everybody take care.